Hi, everyone, and welcome to You Got Moxie, the podcast about the how of change making. My name is Julianne Crommett. I'm your host, and I'm so excited to welcome today Danielle Feinberg. She's the director of photography for lighting at Pixar Animation Studios, and she's going to share a bit about her journey in the technology and art sectors and her efforts to promote inclusion in the STEM fields. She'll share a bit also about how she faced being one of the only women in her computer science and engineering classes growing up, and how she not only overcame that, but is making that experience different and better for all the women and girls and anybody else who's felt underrepresented. And so we're so excited to have her today diving into the STEM fields. Welcome, Danielle Feinberg. Welcome, everyone, here at You've Got Moxie. Again, this is Julianne Crommett, and today we have the pleasure of being joined by the incomparable Danielle Feinberg. Danielle, it's so wonderful to have you here and just have you on the podcast.
It's so awesome to be here. I'm very happy to be here.
Oh my God, what a joy. For those at home, Danielle and I have known each other about a decade now, which will probably come out in some of the stories we're going to share, and have been in the great change work in the technology sector, especially as it intersects with art. And so with that, Danielle, can you share with everybody a little bit about yourself? And as part of that story, maybe if there was a moment that struck you about, oh man, something's got to change here.
Yeah. When I was in college, I decided to study computer science because I already loved computers. And in all the classrooms I was in for certainly computer classes and engineering classes, it was maybe 10% women. So this is, I graduated in 96, so this is the mid 90s. And so that kind of set up this dynamic of when you walk in the room, you already feel like you don't belong. So anything that doesn't go well just sort of serves to underscore that. So there's this whole extra level that the few women in there were dealing with in terms of just trying to study something they wanted to study. Yeah. And the guys would kind of make teams for the homework, even though you weren't necessarily supposed to do that. But it was, 3 a.m, and we were in the basement of the science center doing our homework, and they were teaming up, and the women were sort of these little outposts around the way, not teaming up. I always follow the things that I love, and so that did not stop me. But it certainly played a huge role in everything we're going to talk about here today, I think. So after about 8 months after I graduated, I started at Pixar Animation Studios. Pixar had put out Toy Story in addition to some of the short films from the late 80s and early 90s. And I started there in a very kind of technical entry-level problem-solving position in rendering on the second movie of Bug's Life, and quickly discovered that I loved lighting and I loved everything to do with making the movies. Within 6 months, I was actually made the lead of the rendering group, and the other members of the department were 9 men, and they were all older than me except for one of them. And so I had to figure out pretty quickly how to lead in a very unique situation, I would say. And all wonderful guys, so it wasn't mostly all wonderful guys. So it wasn't as challenging as it could have been in other scenarios. But but I did a little lighting out of Bug's Life, and then I did a little modeling and a little lighting. And it was clear that as I went through the next couple films, Toy Story 2 and Monsters Incorporated, that lighting was really my thing. And so I did lighting for a long time, and I directed the lighting for WALL-E, Brave, and Coco. And then once Coco finished, I'm like, okay, I feel like I finally understand this directing lighting thing called Director of Photography for Lighting, and promptly decided to put my name in for a different position because that's what you do when you feel like you've got something down.
That's absolutely right. That's absolutely right.
Yeah, but so I was visual effects supervisor on Turning Red, and I'm the first woman that's done that position in 20 years here. And that movie, we had the first all-female leadership team in the history of Pixar for a film. And so there was a lot of firsts sort of happening. And so I guess I give you sort of that detailed of a path just so you can see kind of how I've seen this from all different sides a little bit. It was in 2003 that someone sent a mail out at Pixar and asked for people to donate money for a girls' math and science camp to go see a professional women's soccer game. And I thought, oh, that's a girls' math and science camp. That's so cool. I wish I had had that when I was little. And so I went and looked at the website, and got an email off it. And I sent this email off, and I said, well, I know it's too late for this year because camp's next year, but maybe for next year, I'd love to do something to help. I wish I would have had this growing up. And then I gave my credentials like I needed to when you're volunteering to help at a camp. I went to Harvard. I studied computer science. I work at Pixar now. And the woman who runs the camp, who's now a dear friend of mine, I think she emailed me back within the hour and was like, I have scheduled you for 3 classes next Wednesday. And so I suddenly had to figure out what on earth I was going to talk about. And at the time, I went down with a VHS tape that showed the different stages a shot in a film goes through in Finding Nemo. And I had a pad of paper and a pen, and I would press play and pause on this VCR. But it was this most magical thing because as I'm talking about all the math and science behind our films, which really starts with plotting points on an XYZ axis that everybody remembers, no matter how much you loved or hated math, right? Like you can still remember that.
That's right.
That's the basis for how we make these 3-dimensional worlds inside the computer. And so this was a camp for girls that were 13, between 7th and 8th grade. I could see the excitement in their eyes as I was explaining how this math and science came together to create some of their favorite movies that they had seen. And so I think that was my first foray into understanding that I had a little bit of power to change the situation that I had sat through in college and had to kind of like force my way through. And so it's not the moment I realized I needed change, but it was the moment I realized that I could potentially make change in whatever small way, and I loved it. So.
Amazing. And it's interesting, by the way, I'm very proudly wearing my WIA pin today as part of our conversation for Women in Animation, or WIA for everybody at home. And Danielle's also a member and a mentor for WIA, which is wonderful. And it's making me think about even your work with WIA as an extension of this story. That's where my brain was going. And we have another guest this season who reflected something I think really interesting about how you actually distinguished the moment between you knew change needed to happen, and then you felt actually capable of making that change. And not only that, you liked it. And then it led to probably more, which we'll talk about in a second. And one of the insights that she shared was she just did the thing that was right in front of her. That's where she began. And it's exactly what you just shared. It was absolutely the thing that happened to come through your inbox right in front of you. And it all began there. Yep. And not setting out to change the whole system, right, at once, but like that piece of it, right? Yeah. And like riffing on that a little bit, like where did you go from there? And is there a project that sort of sticks out that you were like, oh, I learned from that initial moment, and then it led to this? And if you could share a little bit about sort of how you built a little bit from that initial moment to some of the efforts you've done since then, and how did you think about that build or that scale, if you will? Because that's kind of the next step. What do I do after I have that initial go moment?
So I kept going back to that camp, so every year. So that's a very slow build, right? But then the organizer of the camp asked me if I'd speak at another thing. And then anytime anyone asked me to speak, I just said yes, because it was all stuff for girls in STEM. And then I'd get invited to a conference to talk about girls in STEM. And so I really made an effort to say yes to everything because it felt like I was making a difference, and I was happy to use my time that way if it meant more girls stuck with it. And so there's just always this girl in my head that's sitting in that class understanding how hard that was. And if I could change that for them, then it's worth it. And sometimes you go and give a talk and you feel like, oh, I don't quite have the audience. Like, I don't know if this is going well. And I always am like, if this makes a difference for one person, that's all I care about, right? And so it's like, I just need to get to one person and make them, even if it's just their day happier, that's fine. And so it just kind of turned into, I was doing some speaking, and I was getting to go to kind of higher impact things. And then I heard from the people that were doing Made with Code for Google. And they wanted to feature me as one of their mentors. And so this was, Google put a whole bunch of money into trying to get more girls into computer science. And by featuring various ways, but featuring women who are doing interesting things using computer science, and also younger people who are doing really fascinating things with computer science. So, and then they asked me to go to the launch in New York. So then I did that too. So I gave like a 12-minute talk or something that was part of the launch. And so both of those things ended up, the profile of me and that speech ended up online. And so then now people could find me in a different way. And then the next sort of big thing that happened was TED reached out to me for a thing they were doing called TED Talks Live in conjunction with PBS, and asked me to come talk about the science of light. And I was like, I don't care about the science of light in the way that you mean, but I'm going to talk to you about light and computer science and art and math and science and all the cool stuff that makes our movies. And it'll be about lighting, but I think she wanted the physics of light, but I don't know what, she didn't really know either, I don't think. But
I was like, half
awesome.
our listeners are probably Googling right now lighting and what lighting means within animation, which is another podcast, by the way, for everybody. But check it out.
And so that was part of the TED Talk, though, was how do I explain what lighting and computer animation is? Because it never failed when someone's like, oh, what do you do at Pixar? Are you an animator? And I'm like, I do lighting. And they go, oh, and then they go, oh, what? What's lighting? So, but as a basic thing, just to, if we don't put any lights into our three-dimensional world inside the computer, the frames will actually come out black because the software is it's doing the physics calculations. It goes to find the light that maybe it's their sun and what color it is and how bright it is and how it reflects off of whatever material it is and on and on. So that was a big deal because it went on, it was a TED Talk that went out and has been viewed over like 3 million times. And I get messages from teachers regularly that are like, I show this to my class all the time. And so it was just suddenly like, could reach a much bigger audience. And my real goal was to not mess up, but also, to be able to have something where girls and women could see someone who had done both art and technology and was hopefully a somewhat normal human being and loved what they did and worked on stuff that they knew and could be proud, that people in the world knew about and could be proud of. So I think the same thing as your last guest said was I wasn't trying to save the world. I just was kind of saying yes to what was in front of me. And that's ended up there because of that, because I just always I love it. So I put a lot of effort into it and it's very meaningful to me. And so I think you have success as a byproduct when that's what's happening, when it's not necessarily your goal, but that's what you're after. So that was sort of outside of Pixar. And then inside of Pixar, I had done a little bit with Girls Who Code and was speaking at their camps a little bit. And then one of their people said, well, why doesn't Pixar host a camp? And I was like, oh, they'll never do that. Like, we have this very closed campus. You can't just come and get a tour or something. But I was like, I'm going to ask. And so I went and made this whole pitch for why we should have the Girls Who Code summer camp, which meant some number of high school girls coming every day to Pixar and being here and learning how to code. And to my absolute shock, they agreed. And I think we're just at that turning point of where businesses realized they needed to start doing some diversity stuff. I didn't realize that Pixar was quite there yet. There's so much struggle to making good movies that just has been very much of a focus. And so it was this wonderful moment of feeling very proud of Pixar and also a little silly. I hadn't asked for more earlier because I just assumed I would get shut down, and then they approved this. And the coolest part about that one was that it was more, I would say it was more inspiring for the people who work here, even than for the girls who were here learning how to code. And, it's like, so cool to have them where they could see all these people who code and make movies. But everybody here was so excited they were here. We had them out in the middle of one of our buildings, so they were very visible. And we had just a landslide of people that were offering to come speak or mentor or do whatever. And people were so pumped for it. And so that was a really good lesson in terms of, making stuff happen, but also asking for things even when you think, because there's a little bit of you build up political capital wherever you're working. And how much am I going to spend this by doing some ask like this? And so I think I underestimated what might be able to happen, or maybe it was the timing was great, but it was a totally wonderful thing. And the really funny thing is one summer, one of the campers came up to me and she was like, I was at the math and science camp when I was coming out of 7th grade, and I still have your autograph and the report that I wrote about you. And she was amazing. And she applied to Harvard, and I wrote a letter of recommendation for her, and she got in, and I went back to Harvard to give a talk, and I got to hang out with her. And like, it was such a cool kind of full circle kind of thing that was really amazing.
Oh my gosh. I'm sorry. I'm like speechless by this story. It's just the one life like story that you just shared there. And, you know, something else, Danielle, that really stuck out from what you were saying, you highlighted it, which is that you said yes. When things happened, you said yes, even if it maybe was a little scary or out of comfort zone, right? And the other thing I think that was really interesting about what you just shared on the Pixar side of the story was using the political capital. And sometimes when we might feel like the lonely only within an organization, right? You might be the only one of your background, you know, you might be the only one that's maybe technical and non-technical space. You might be the only woman. You might be the only queer person, right? Or you might not speak the language as fluently, right? There's all these moments that we can feel like a lonely only. And so spending the political capital feels harder, you know what I mean? Or riskier, if you will. Yeah. And I think a lot of our guests have reflected on this idea that, which is why the podcast is called You Got Moxie, is a little bit about making change, is you have to do that little Moxie extra. You know what I mean? You got to use your Moxie just a little bit and believe that it actually will be okay. And in fact, in your case, it was more than okay. They said yes and moved. And all of our guests have shared some version of that movement forward in the moment of that ounce of courage, right? That ounce of extra. And so I love that. And then you got to have the full circle moment with the young woman. Yeah. And then she got into Harvard. I'm sorry, as an alum.
That crazy?
We also shared this in common. So Danielle and I, everybody at home, met during the Google Girls Who Code piece and all of that campaign. And I just think it's so amazing, the full circle. I'm also a Harvard alum, everybody, so this is where this gets very weird. I swear not everybody on this podcast went to Harvard, everybody. But I think it's also amazing because you having that extra ounce of courage was actually an extra ounce of courage actually for that young woman as well. Yeah. Like, think about it. Like, if you hadn't had that, she wouldn't have been at Pixar, had the full circle moment with you, then it connected to Harvard. That's a domino effect that nobody could have predicted from one decision.
Do you want one more piece of that?
Oh my gosh, does it get better?
Yeah. The final piece of that story is, for that TED Talk, I had to do 2 nights. And I had to wear the same clothes because they wanted, when it went on PBS, they wanted to be intercutting between the 2 talks. And so the first night went well. I was a little stiff because I was nervous. I had family that had flown out. It was at a Broadway theater in New York. Like, it was a lot. And the second night, for some reason, I should have been more confident because I had already done one night. But I had the rehearsal had been really funky, and I had someone following me around backstage who was supposed to be helping, but she was messing me up incredibly, and I couldn't get her to kind of go away. And she kept going, "Are you nervous? Are you nervous? You shouldn't be nervous. I heard you were great last night, but are you nervous?" And like, you know, when you just need to get in your own frame of mind, and I couldn't get her to stop talking to me.
Right.
And so I walked right up to the edge of the stage, right where the curtains are. So the audience can't see me, but if she was going to come talk to me, she was basically going to have to walk on stage. And I was opening that night. And so it was like the time's ticking, and I'm about to have like an anxiety attack. And I'm standing there, and all of a sudden I thought about the woman that we were talking about, that I had these multiple like sort of circles with, and then one other student who I had met up at Girls Who Code at Expedia up in Washington, who has a lot of physical disabilities, but she just powers through it. And it was so inspiring. And then my friend Kaisine, who was the student who ended up going to Harvard. And I thought about both of them, and I thought, this has nothing to do with me. This is for students like that. And if they are the successes they are, then what am I doing? Like, who cares? And all of a sudden I'm like dancing and bouncing to the music. And I was just, and And I went out there and like owned the stage. And I have never, ever had anything flip 180 like that before. And it was all because I was thinking about them and all how much they sort of inspired me. And so, it was, like it was a magical sort of experience and talk. And I owe it to them in a lot of ways.
It's amazing. Oh my gosh. Everybody at home, are you crying yet? Because I'm getting emotional over here. And I think what's amazing about that too is that the idea that you made yourself a vessel for the message and for the information, as opposed to it being about yourself. And it became about other people, and it became about, can I communicate this so that it's connecting in the way that I connected with these amazing people? And that's it. That's the flip. And, from another conversation, somebody said, I'm a part of a continuum. It didn't start with me. It doesn't end with me. And that's the part where if you center in that, which is exactly what you did in that moment, you became part of the continuum. Yeah. And then suddenly it just flowed because you were not alone. Actually, there were all those amazing people that came before you that allowed you for that moment on stage, and those amazing people you were thinking about that are keeping it all going. Yeah. And isn't that the whole thing at the end of the day?
Yeah.
Well, I know we only have a few more minutes, so I wanted you to get just a quick reflection for those folks who are facing challenges, right? They're hitting a brick wall. They've said yes, and then something gets in the way, or they're starting to feel their own tiredness or feeling burnt out. What advice do you have when you face moments, whether it be a challenge that you met or a challenge in yourself, and what kept you going, and what did you do?
Yeah, great question. I think there's several ways to go with that, which is generally, how do you recharge in life? Which for me, I'm an extrovert, is being around people and being around friends and family. And especially if I'm getting burnt out by things at work or trying to make change in the world, sort of recentering around people who have nothing to do with that, so that it's a little bit of remembering that there's things outside of whatever you're doing, and that it kind of takes the pressure down a little bit, I think. I think also a huge thing for me that works for me is if I do something nice for someone else, that actually is, to me, is very regenerating in a big way. And, even just a little thing is super helpful to me. I think when you're at work and potentially running into roadblocks, I definitely always have people around me that I always seek out people, make connections in a genuine kind of way. But I seem to always have someone that I can go to that's like, hey, I'm running into this. Like, what do you think is going on here? And I spend a lot of time building up trust with people. I try to be very real and open with people. And, if there's a problem, I'm going to tell them there's a problem, like a producer, say, on a movie. I'm not just walking up to the president of the company telling them there's a problem. Let me say that a different way. So if there's a producer on a movie, I'm going to tell them ahead of time, like, hey, I'm running into this problem. Here's the ways I'm handling it. But I just want you to know this is happening, because I don't ever want someone above me to be surprised by a problem that if I'm not sure, I'm going to be able to just take care of it. And then, so when I come back and if I can't solve it and I need sort of a heavier hand to do it, I've built up trust there because they know that I already tried to fix it. I already gave them a heads up, and they're sort of ready, but they didn't actually have to do anything about it in the moment. So it's just one example of how I build the trust. But then when you can go to those same people who normally you would never go to, I don't know, like I'm picturing someone here who's a vice president. You wouldn't normally go to her and ask her for like sort of inside scoop of like, well, I'm running into this wall. What is this about? But because you have built up that trust, she's going to pull me aside and be like, here's what you actually need to do. And with any venture or company you're involved in, there's dynamics happening that there's plenty of reasons you have no idea why they're happening. And it can be just dumb politics, but it can also be, this is one of the things I realized as I moved up, is that decisions made by people above me may look like they're silly or not the right decision. But the truth is, I don't actually know all the factors. And so to reserve my judgment, because as you move up, you suddenly are like, well, I can't tell the people below me why we're doing that. because of whatever reason. Like, I try to be as transparent as possible, but there's certain things you can't tell people, right? And so sort of understanding that sort of dynamic. And so all of it to say that there's things happening, and if you can get your sort of allies and people that you've built your trust up with, then I think that gives you a pathway is to kind of get around whatever you're running into if it turns out to be some kind of institutional thing you're running into.
Love that. So the idea of relationships built over time, which allows for trust to exist so that you can think about other angles or possibilities with something you're running into. And then how you keep going. I love the thing you shared about, I do something nice for somebody else, and it can be small. And folks, you can just start doing that tomorrow if you want. So Danielle, I just can't thank you enough for your time, for your generosity, and for these awesome insights. And by the way, for the films that you brought all of us. Can we just say thank you, thank you, thank you. Thanks again for joining us for You Got Moxie. Continue to follow us and listen to your favorite episodes at collectivemoxie.com. That's collectivemoxie.com. We're excited to see you next time. Take care.